Good morning. My name's John Hont. I'm a board member of Dying with Dignity Victoria. I've been a member of the Society for 24 years and a board member for nearly 10. I was also the chair of the organising committee for our 2010 conference in Melbourne for the World Federation. Okay, a little bit about Australia, which is where I'm from. It's a federation that commenced in 1901. There are 6 states, including Victoria, and 2 territories. The Northern Territory, you see there in pink, and the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, not shown there. But I'm from Victoria, the little green triangle at the bottom. It has a population of 6 million out of a total population of 25 million. It's a highly urbanised society. Most people live in the very large cities. It's a very multicultural city. Capital is Melbourne. The Rights of the Terminally Ill Act was passed in 1995 and came into effect in 1996 in the Northern Territory. Key figures were Dr. Philip Nitschke and Marshall Perron, the Chief Minister of that territory. And 4 people died using that law. It was overturned by the federal government in 1997. The federal government has the power to do this with the territories, but not the states. So that's just a quirk in the law, but it was a very unfortunate one that was applied there. And then this was followed by more than 30 unsuccessful attempts in the states to enact voluntary assisted dying laws since then. So we had a period of some 20 years of darkness while various states were trying to achieve voluntary assisted dying legislation. So I'm now going to talk about the components that led to our success. There are a few individuals and some organisations. And one of the key figures was Dr. Rodney Syme. He's been a vice president of the World Federation. He's an international figure as well as a national figure pioneering dying with dignity and voluntary assisted dying. But he became frustrated that these legislative attempts for VAD, that's voluntary assisted dying, were not succeeding in Australian parliaments. He decided to publicly admit that he'd been providing advice on voluntary assisted dying since about 2005. This caused some news in the press, but nothing much happened. From 2014, he declared quite courageously that he'd provided medicine or medication to assist people to die and named 4 such persons. And this was an attempt to provoke the justice system to prosecute so that a common law ruling could follow. But what actually happened was that a couple of police people came around to his house, all very nice. They had a nice cup of tea and a nice chat, and they went away. The justice system hardly reacted to this provocation. He did have some trouble with the Medical Board of Australia that placed a condition on his medical licence in 2016, although that was overturned by a tribunal. So another key figure was Peter Short. He was a corporate executive that was diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. And what happened was that Rodney Syme's publicity activity caught Peter's attention, and they met, and Peter became a very energetic and vocal and effective advocate for VAD. And Peter, just as an individual, embarked on a highly visible, broad media campaign, appearing in social media, print, radio, TV, you name it, he was there. He also featured in a documentary film. So this guy was unstoppable, at least until he died. He's just everywhere. So now this was the politics prevailing at the time. 2 of the minor parties in our parliament were considering introducing a private members' bill to legalise VAD in early 2015. However, the leader of the government in the Legislative Council, that is our upper house in the state, was a long-time VAD supporter, and he committed to legislation after meeting with Peter Short, Dying with Dignity, and Andrew Denton, a high-profile media personality with tremendous access to politicians and media. So he was a great facilitator. And very importantly, though, both the state premier and the health minister had in their families either serious illness or bad death, making them ultimately strongly supportive of VAD. Now, I say ultimately supportive because particularly the Premier, he is a Catholic, and he was much opposed to this. And it took personal experience of his father having a very bad death for him to come round and see the other side of the situation. So the process that was followed, after heated debate, the Legislative Council resolved to commence an inquiry into the end-of-life matters in May 2015. So this was a parliamentary committee of 8 people, so they were all parliamentarians. The key here was that this was a government-sponsored activity. It had the government support, and it involved committing of sufficient resources to do the job properly. The inquiry ran for a year. There are over 1,000 written submissions and about 400 witness statements. 6 of the 8 members visited overseas jurisdictions which had VAD. 2 refused to go. They wanted nothing to do with the whole topic, actually. So, and they opposed it from start to finish. But the inquiry had resulted in 49 recommendations, mostly related to palliative care. They couldn't even get this inquiry up without really focusing it on palliative care. Recommendation 49 was that there should be voluntary assisted dying legislation. The government considered the report from this inquiry and for 6 months and then appointed an advisory panel to establish how the model should work. The panel had a wide range of representatives, including medical, nursing, disability, consumer, legal and palliative care expertise. And this panel again consulted widely with community groups and individuals. The panel's report became the framework for draft legislation. So the campaigners for voluntary assisted dying was, of course, Dying with Dignity Victoria. We established a team focused on the political campaign. We organised for members to lobby all legislators. They were all individually targeted. We sent members out to them. We had an effective communications program, including letters, phone calls, social media, podcasts, and of course, personal visits. There was also a Go Gentle group, which is an Australian-wide group that started about this time. It was led by this media personality, Andrew Denton, and it was a national body to lobby for voluntary assisted dying, and we funded them extensively. There are many other campaigners and supporters, including the Nurses and Midwives Federation, a group called Doctors for Assisted Dying Choice, Christians Supporting Choice for Voluntary Euthanasia, Exit International, and many others. We had also, of course, our opponents, as you would expect, and they were the religious hierarchies of most persuasions. There was Right to Life Australia, which is an anti-abortion, anti-euthanasia lobby, the Australian Christian lobby with pretty much the same objectives, and the Australian Medical Association, which just parroted the World Medical Association dictum that we don't want any of this voluntary euthanasia. The Victorian branch of the AMA, the Australian Medical Association in this case, moderated its position somewhat during the debate, but the federal president was opposed, and that was quite a problem. However, during the process, the Royal Australian College of GPs and the Australian Medical Students Association came out in support. So in Parliament, the bill was fiercely debated in both chambers, And it went back and forth between the chambers as modifications were made. But in reality, there was, a conscience vote was allowed by both parties, both major parties. In reality, there was great pressure applied to the Conservative members of Parliament to vote against VAD. And there were many distortions, misrepresentations, lies from the Conservative side of politics. Eventually the bill was passed by a narrow margin of 22 to 18. So there was a lot of horse trading and, it just was necessary to get the bill passed. State elections are now due in November and the opponents have vowed to force a repeal if they have the opportunity to do so. Critical success factors were 43 years of relentless campaigning by Dying with Dignity, consistent support by the public, 75 to 85%, nothing unique there. I think we see this in all jurisdictions. But what was crucial was this fortunate confluence of events. Rodney Symes' public declarations, trying to force the issue into the courts. Peter Short's energetic, effective activism that got the politicians going. The key politicians' personal experiences and Go Gentle Australia lobbying. And above all, it was a government-driven and government-resourced consultative process, unlike most of the other attempts at legislations in Australia, which were private members' bill for the most part, and extensive community consultation. What are the key provisions? That comes into effect in June in 2019 after 18 months of an implementation period. But I would make the next 2 points. It's onerous, it's bureaucratic, and it's for patients. There are 68 safeguards. It's mooted to be the safest and most secure in the world, but it's almost unworkable. I mean, we still think it's a great victory, mind you, because, it's a whole lot better than nothing. It's the criteria are very restrictive for eligibility, and it's based basically on the Oregon model, but then we've put in a few more extra goodies to stop people using it. So I'll just leave that there for a moment. But you have to be an adult, you have to be a citizen or resident, you have a disease that'll cause death, and it'll cause it within 6 months unless it's a neurodegenerative disease. And the process is that you need 2 medical practitioners to certify independently eligibility, but both of them have to be fellows of a medical college. Sorry about the spelling there. One of them has to be a specialist in the disease of the person. And then there are 3 requests required: a verbal request, a written request appropriately witnessed, and a second verbal request. And then the medical practitioner has to seek Department of Health permission to prescribe medication, and it's an oral medication to be ingested by the person. Special provisions, extra hoops to be gone through for intravenous application of the medication. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.